Hi, my name is Uminadia bintu Wahab. My metric number 273513 and my presentation today is about the derogation during the state of emergency. So now, as you can see from my slide, this is an overview for my presentations today, where firstly I will give an introduction to our presentation's topic, which I will explain on the derogation and state of emergency. Next, I will move on to the convention, which I take two convention where they will protect the human rights for the people during the state of emergency, where I choose ECHR and the ICCR. So next, I will pick out two case study, which I give example domestically and internationally, which I choose Malaysia and Nigeria as the two example for my case study. So lastly, I will conclude and wrap my presentation and give out a short summary. So why did I choose this topic, and why this topic is so important to be bring out to the public? So firstly, it is to not worsen the existing crisis. So it is because a state of emergency, there already is a chaotic situation. If human rights are being violated, the people will rise and start to oppose and add to the current burden. So as number two, it is to keep violence to keep happening. So by sharing on this topic, it will give awareness to the public to be aware of the surrounding during the situation, the state of emergency. Although the rights of the people will be limited, this does not mean the responsibility or the authorities can simply taking advantage towards the human rights. So number three, it is to get equal treatments as others. In an emergency, everyone must be treated equally and justly. For instance, food and help should be distributed fairly and in accordance with human capacity. For instance, the wealthy receive the necessary share, and the unfortunate people, they will receive a sufficient amount. So what is the state of emergency? So the state of emergency is when a government that declares a state of emergency in a particular region, where they will implement specific measures such as greater authority, greater power for the police or the army. So it's generally responding to civil unrest or a natural disaster such as an earthquake. So even in times of emergency, certain entitlements are not derogable while others are. So, as you can see, the primary international human rights treaty that permits states party to derogate from several rights in times of emergency. So, Article 15 of the ECHR that allow states under extreme situation to deviate from their obligation to protect certain freedom and rights under the Convention for temporary, also control and supervised way. So the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, is one of the conventions that protects the human rights for the people during the state of emergency. So the former European Commission of Human Rights, they set out certain rules in order to address in details when declared public emergency threatening the life of the nation. So number one, the crisis or danger must be actual or imminent. So it means that the situation, the danger, the threat must be real, not only as a propaganda. So number two, it should affect or involve the whole nation, not only just a particular small region, but it will give impacts towards the nation, towards the states. So number three, the continuance of the organized life of the community must be threatened. So the citizens to be called as the public emergency where they threat the life of the nation, where the people will feel threatened by the issues or crisis. So number 4, the crisis or danger must be exceptional in that the normal means. Secondly, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights ICCPR 1996, where the ICCPR 1996 is they set out and they address a certain rules, a detailed rules where they mention about the non-derogable rights, where the government, the authorities cannot step out their other boundaries in putting out the measures during the declaration of the state of emergency. So as we can see, it have the rights to life, the people, all the people, they have rights to life, they have the rights against the torture, the violence, inhuman punishment or treatment, rights against any slavery and servitude, against imprisonment for failure to fulfill contractual obligations. Also, rights against ex post facto punishment, rights to recognition, rights to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. So, the ECHR, the convention, and also the ICCPR, they protects certain rights and freedoms from derogations. So, number 1, COVID-19 pandemic in Malaysia. So, not only pandemic of COVID-19 happened in Malaysia domestically, but the pandemic also happened around the world, worldwide spread. But I choose to specifically address the case happened in Malaysia to relate to all the audience today. So, the government of Malaysia declared the state of emergency towards the pandemic of COVID-19 on March 18, 2020. It is a measure where they want to contain the outbreak, where they formulate based on 3 principal strategies. They formulate the measure of regulation during the state of emergency based on 3 principles. So, number 1, slowing introduction of global infection. Number 2, slowing infection of local outbreaks and executing community mitigation strategies. So, travel restriction for citizens, suspensions of immigration facilities to travel from affected regions, isolation of confirmed cases, and quarantine of exposed individuals were imposed to slow introduction of global infection. So as we can see, these are the certain regulation that were set by the Malaysian government to prevent the pandemic to become more widespread in Malaysia. So from the case study in Malaysia, the pandemic of COVID-19, it shows us that it is crucial to reckon the importance of executed public health measure in such critical times to disallow an uncontrolled spread and replication of the virus to the human living environment, which would ultimately be difficult to tackle. Malaysian 1969 racial riots. On 1969, brutal racial riots occurred on May 13, where it will be remembered as one of the Malaysians' worst moments, where on this date, ethnic Malays and Chinese, they engaged in violent interracial conflicts that left hundreds dead and caused great trauma for the country at the time. So the riot happened after the 1969 of Malaysian general election, when the Alliance Party, which have been in control, they lost seats to the Democratic Action Party and Parti Gerakan, which had the Chinese majority. So there are violence attacks, including rioting, looting, assault, arson, demonstration, property destruction, firefights, and murder. All these violence attacks were happened during this period. So Malaysian government, as a result, were being suspended the parliament as the result from the riots, and Malaysian were declared as a state of national emergency. So then, the Majlis Gerakan Negara Magaran was then formed as a caretaker administration to rule the country between 1969 and 1971. So Magaran, they were in charge in restoring law and order in Malaysia following the incidents. So these issues has contributed a huge impact on Malaysian politics since it caused Tun Abdul Razak to take over Tun Abdul Rahman as a Prime Minister and eventually shift the government policy. So move to the international example for the state of emergency. Boko Haram attacks where the Nigerian President Jonathan, that he had declared a state of emergency in 3 states after a series of deadly attacks by Islamist militant groups as an attempt to curb the increasingly violent attacks by armed group Boko Haram. Boko Haram is an Islamist militant group based in Nigeria northeast. The overreaching aim of the group, which they began as an offshoot of the Salafi movement, a branch of Sunni Islam, where they want to establish a fundamentalist Islamic state with Sharia criminal courts. So militants from Boko Haram, they have been blamed for most of the violence, where they left 2,000 people dead since 2010, where Boko Haram they made brutal campaigns where they have attacks on schools, they burned the village, hundreds of abductions happened, where this attacks is a response to a long-standing religious tension in the state, where also in that particular place happened political corruption and also widening economic disparity in Nigeria. So this Islamic group, they fight to overthrow the current government, and they want to create an Islamic state in the north. So then Nigerian security force, they made an effort, declare the state of emergency and have made sizable gains against Boko Haram with the help of neighboring states. In 2013, President Jonathan, they launched major offensive attacks against the Boko Haram group. So by declaring the state of emergency, they succeed in pushing militants out from the cities, but the attacks in rural areas they still continue with regularity. So Nigeria, they sought military support from the neighbor, where it has increasingly suffered attacks during Boko Haram upsurge. So since 2015, Cameroon, Chad and Niger, they have deployed thousands of troops as a part of multinational force authorized by the African Union. So I think that's it, where my presentation is leading towards the end. So I would like to thank you for the audience to voluntarily to hear my presentation. So thank you and Assalamualaikum.